Jets GM Mike Maccagnan, the draft will officially commence Thursday night in Chicago. What will these final days of preparation be like for you and your staff?
Well, we've got the board sort of built right now for the most part. Now going forward, we're going to more or less tweak it to make sure we have the right order of how we sort of value the players going forward. And then the other thing we end up doing at this point in time is going through and reaching out to teams ahead of us to kind of figure out where the value is going to be in terms of possible trades if we decide to move up. And also reach out to teams behind us to see if anybody out there would be interested in moving up to our pick at 6, just to sort of give ourselves options leading up to the draft so not everything actually happens during the draft.
A lot of the pundits look at this draft and say, hey, there are a few blue chippers, and then after that, a lot of the prospects are kind of bunched together. Do you see it in this draft class?
I think pretty much every draft is like this. And some drafts are a little more talented, so maybe they have a few more of those blue chip guys. And what we do is try to anticipate, obviously, how we see those players, who may potentially be at 6 for us, and again, make the determination of possibly moving up in the draft to go get one of those guys. And we trade that off versus the picks we'd have to give up for them, and then we try to project what would be available at those picks, and then that's how you sort of make the valuation of it. But I would say, like every draft, it's not unlike every other draft. There's always a core group of guys that people kind of think are quote-unquote the blue chippers at the top of the draft.
This is your first draft as a general manager. When you guys are in the room this week, will you actually go over mock draft scenarios and, starting with Tampa Bay, say, hey, we're going to slot guys like this, so you're prepared for all sorts of different situations?
We try to anticipate. In every draft I've ever been around, there's always things that happen that you don't expect. It's the nature of the draft. That's why it's so interesting. I think every draft I've sort of seen, all the mocks kind of get it sort of right, but there's always ones in there where some player gets picked that you're not expecting. And what happens is, when that happens, suddenly it's almost you're expecting to go down a certain path, and when you have a different pick that you don't expect, things go differently. And then all of a sudden you realize, well, hey, maybe a player we weren't expecting is going to be there. Then maybe you want to move up a little bit to get him, or maybe you suddenly realize, hey, we're going to get maybe not just the one guy we wanted out of that group, we may have an opportunity 2 or 3, and then all of a sudden you decide, okay, well, now do we want to move back a little bit? So it puts a lot of wheels in motion. It's not just a 2-dimensional thing, it kind of works in 3 dimensions in terms of how the draft unfolds.
Are you happy what you've been able to accomplish since the new year? Because you said, hey, listen, free agency, need, and there's more certainty there. Draft, you never want to go in there and say, hey, I gotta have this position, so maybe I'll reach there.
What you try to do is you try to keep things that have no bearing on that player. You're trying to evaluate the player, which is a difficult thing to do to project a college player. But what we try to do is keep things that have no bearing on whether that player is going to be successful out of your process. So if you're in a draft decision process and you're trying to evaluate a player and you have a need at that position, and that need makes you manipulate or makes you kind of force the player up because you really need one, factors in something that basically has no bearing whatsoever if that player is going to be successful. So that's the tricky part. Now, if you have 3 players evaluated the same exact way objectively and you're trying to decide which one to take, then maybe you can factor in need because, hey, that could be the tiebreaker. But you have to be really disciplined in your process to not factor in something that has, in your evaluation process, that doesn't really have any bearing on the player being successful. And that's the tricky part, because it's a very subjective process when we're going through this. You've
been involved in this for more than a quarter century. Do you have any favorite draft memories?
Oh, Lord. I don't know if I have any favorite ones. I think, honestly, the draft is, like, to me, very exciting. What you see in it is you see the potential to really, do really good things in terms of finding really good players, and you find a player that in a late round that becomes a Hall of Fame player. You find a player in the first round that exceeds your expectations. And the other thing too, people don't realize is we literally spend a year to basically make decisions on 3 days. Like, you spend a whole year working for 3 days, and that's the culmination of a whole year's worth of effort. So to me, that's kind of the exciting part about it. Like, you've spent so much time doing this, and you get to this point in time, and now you make your picks, and then eventually you see how you do, which is the exciting part about it.